I call the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's a real privilege to speak in support of the bill and to speak in support of community radio. Community radio is super important right across this country. 1 in 5 Australians listen to community radio every week. 2/3 of community radio stations exist in rural and regional Australia. It is just a vital part of our national cultural and communicative life. And that's one of the reasons why we're dealing with this now. I mean, this is the first 6 months of the government. We've got lots of big things to do. People in the community will have seen the focus on things like the National Anti-Corruption Commission and the bill to deliver secure jobs and better pay. I mean, here we are before the end of our first year, and we are going to do something about community radio because that's how important community radio is. And so the bill does a number of things. It improves regulatory conditions, which will allow the sector to thrive. It works hand in hand with the fact that we're providing additional funding through the budget, an additional $4 million, which lifts the annual contribution to more than $20 million a year. And we've established a review to look at new ways to increase the sector's sustainability. All those things are really important. They've been identified by the sector for some time. I note that Jo Curtin, she's the CEO of Community Broadcasting Foundation, has said that the funding will have a really positive impact on sector sustainability and the media landscape. In fact, I quote Jo Curtin, where she said, "This funding will enhance the sustainability of our sector, which serves as one of the only remaining local sources of news and information, particularly in regional and remote communities." And that really makes the point that it's not just the statistics I mentioned before, Deputy Speaker, that makes community radio so vital to the best form of community and cultural life in Australia. It is the diversity, it is the place and community-specific program, it is the focus on social inclusion. And the way that community radio is probably, as far as media outlets or platforms go, one of the most significant when it comes to covering First Nations stories, giving space for First Nations voices and indeed First Nations languages. It's also consistent, this bill, and the fact that we've prioritised it in the first 6 months of the government is consistent with another aspect of this government, which is picking up some of the mess that was left to it. It's good that the opposition is going to support this bill, but the opposition had the opportunity to deal with funding uncertainty in the sector when it was behind the wheel, and it didn't do that. It was the sector called on it on the previous government on a number of occasions to provide certainty of funding, which didn't occur. The usual 4-year funding round process was changed with an extension of only 2 years through until 2023. And you can understand the nature of community radio being volunteer-based and often being relatively financially fragile. When you go from 4 years' worth of funding certainty to only 2 years of funding certainty, that is a shock to the system. That's a decision that the former government made, and under the former government, funding was going to decline. It was due to drop to around 17 million over the forward estimates under their last budget, and it's only the additional 4 million that this government is providing that in fact sees funding to community radio go up to 20 million. And I want to acknowledge the fantastic work of the Minister for Communications, because I know that over a long period of time she's been very conscious of community radio as a vital part of our media landscape. And I think it says something about the Minister. It also says something about the government, that while we look at some of the big building blocks of life and shared wellbeing in Australia, we're not forgetting to pick up a whole bunch of the essential bits and pieces along the way. So the Minister for Communications has a huge task to fix up the awful multi-technology NBN mess that's been left to households and businesses across Australia, and she's focused on that. But at the same time, she's going to make sure that we look after community radio ASAP. and that's vital. In my electorate of Freo, I can cite a couple of examples. The Sound of Fremantle was established back in 1987. It's 107.9 FM. Still broadcasting from Hamilton Hill, still run by volunteers. A great example of a station that gives people across my community the opportunity to come and play the music that they're interested in and conduct interviews and current affairs programs around things that are relevant to people in Fremantle and Coburn and East Fremantle. Similarly, Sport FM, 91.3 FM in Hamilton Hill, covers grassroots sports that otherwise wouldn't be covered by bigger commercial outlets. For me personally, community radio has a very special status. It was one of the things that gave my dad the greatest joy in his life. He was involved in university radio back in the 70s, and in fact, when University of Western Australia got a community radio licence in April 1977, 6 UWA as it then was, my dad was part of a group of, I guess they probably were music radicals at the time, because they went to whoever was responsible at university and asked them, could they please carve out a little bit of time, a few hours in the week, for what was called NCP, non-classical programming, non-classical music programming, so they could play blues and jazz and things that they were interested in. 6UWA became 6UVS FM, and then ultimately in 1991 it was restructured to be Arts, I think it was called Arts Radio Limited, or 6RTR FM, and that continues to this day. My dad was the inaugural chair of RTR FM when it was given that new foundation for existence. And the program that he was involved in, Sunday Morning Coming Down, is still a feature of RTR programming, and some of the people that he used to broadcast with are still part of that programming, and it's formed a lovely continuity, I think, in community life in Western Australia, but certainly in my personal life. I've also been fortunate to participate in current affairs stories like programs like Understory, which is run by Adrian Glamorgan, and one of the things I want to note about that is that Adrian has made a big effort to give space in his programming to issues like peace and nuclear non-proliferation, which frankly should get talked about a hell of a lot more than it does. So, Deputy Speaker, this government is focused on a myriad of things. Some of them are big and momentous, but we are not turning our gaze from any of the shortcomings that were left to us by the former government. We're not turning our gaze from any of the key features of community and cultural life that desperately need a helping hand if we're to have a diverse media landscape, a media landscape full of all of the colours and flavours and voices that make Australia such a wonderful place. So I'm very glad to support what we're doing with respect to community radio.
The question is that this bill